Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on our first of our spring training. Today is covering the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We have a lot of really awesome and super smart people joining us today. We have Laura Hanson from the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, Ben Huot from the Utah Department of Transportation, Patti Garver from the Utah Transit Authority, Tim Davis from the Department of Environmental Quality, and Miranda Jones-Cox from our partners at the Wasatch Front Regional Council. They have a lot of great information to share with you guys, so I say we get started now and jump right in. So I am going to kick everything off by talking about the American Rescue Plan Act and the upcoming requirements for our reporting and compliance, and just a brief general overview of some questions that I've been getting recently that hopefully will help clear some things up. So just to start off, we know that the funds are coming in two tranches. You would have seen your last tranche last summer, either sometime between May, June, and to early August. The second tranche will be coming a year after when you received your first tranche of funds, and that'll end up being your total allocation that you get from the state local fiscal recovery funds. There are 4 eligible use categories that have been gone over and changed slightly from the interim rule to the final rule. The first being public health and negative economic impacts. This is your COVID testing, your masking, other personal protective equipment, setting up facilities to do vaccinations, and those sort of efforts that are covered underneath the American Rescue Plan Act. The negative economic impacts being assistance to households, to small businesses, nonprofits, and the sort. And there are many different subcategories underneath that. Premium pay for essential workers, being those that are responding to the pandemic or working those extra hours because of the pandemic, allowing a certain amount of dollars per hour to be added on top of their already existing wages. Revenue replacement, that's seen quite a few changes and probably become the most interesting to a lot of you, as there's now the standard allowance choice or the calculated choice that existed previously. And then where a lot of interest has come in the investment in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So those are your 4 main eligible use categories. Under revenue replacement, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of questions about the standard allowance of $10 million. People have asked whether this includes, if you have to have any sort of information or prove that you have revenue loss, or if there's a qualifier on how big your city is, how much money you received, if you can prove revenue loss, and you don't need any of that. The standard allowance of up to $10 million is available to all recipients of the state local fiscal recovery funds. This doesn't change your total allocation, though. If your total allocation said you're going to receive $2 million, that is what your allocation is. It's $2 million, and that $10 million is just a number that you can go up to. This needs to be selected in your April reporting, though, that is due at the end of April 30th. You need to make this choice, and this will be your one opportunity to make the choice if you're going with the standard allowance for revenue replacement. One of the things that they are mostly promoting is that it'll streamline your reporting. So once you get into the reporting aspect of it, there will be less onerous requirements once you go in there and start completing your project and expenditure report. So the project and expenditure report is due at the end of April. Like I said, this will be the first report for cities with less than 250,000 residents and received less than $10 million, and for NEUs who received less than $10 million. There was a first bout of reporting for those cities that received more than $10 million or had populations over 250,000, and this will be your quarterly report if you fit under that. But if you are one of those cities with less than 250,000 residents that receive less than $10 million, or an NEU that receive less than $10 million, which is most of the cities and towns in Utah, then this will be your first report. Under the reporting in the project and expenditure report, there are expenditure categories, and this changed slightly from the interim final rule. So there are slightly new numbers that are associated with all of these. But these are the 7 expenditure categories. Public health, again, being the response specifically to COVID, whether that's vaccination sites or vaccines, personal protective equipment, or things of that sort. Negative economic impact, being that assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, and that sort. Public health, negative economic impact. This is specifically toward rehiring any of that public staff, public sector staff that may have been lost, or doing certain things to retain that staff. Premium pay, as we talked about, infrastructure being that water, sewer, and broadband, revenue replacement with the standard allowance or the calculated allowance, and then the administrative, which could be transfers to other units of government or other administrative expenses that come along with administering these programs. So under the project expenditure and reporting, as outlined by Treasury in one of their more recent webinars, they gave the basic option of you will go down one of 2 routes. The first being submitting under revenue replacement only, and this is specific to the April 2022 reporting, or submitting projects under other expenditure categories. So if you submit under the revenue replacement only in this April reporting, you have 3 basic steps. The first being creating a project aligned to EC 6.1. So that's expenditure category 6.1, provision of government services. Your step 2 will be completing the fields in the recipient specific module. So you'll be choosing between the standard allowance or the calculated allowance, and there will be a drop down of questions following that once you make these selections that you will fill out. And after that point, if you are doing only the revenue replacement and you fill out the appropriate fields, you will certify and submit. So that's one of the really great bonuses of going in this direction, and something that has been headlined from Treasury. If you're choosing to go under the projects under other expenditure categories, you'll have a little more information to submit. You'll be choosing your project categories, those ones that were previously talked about on the last slide. You'll be doing detailed project level reporting, including obligations and information and details about each project as it pertains to each project category. You'll be doing subrecipient and subaward expenditure reporting that may be required if it is affiliated with what you are doing. Whereas under the revenue replacement option, you will not have to do subrecipient or subaward expenditure reporting. And then you'll want to be sure as you're doing this that you'll align each one to one category only. So you will not be fitting multiple projects under multiple project categories, but instead aligning and reporting it under one project category only. I know there will be more questions on this as we're moving forward, and I hope you guys will have my contact information as we get closer to April, where they said in the beginning of April, the portal should be open so you can begin looking in there and understanding what all is going to be asked of you before that April 30th deadline. And then before I switch it over, I wanted to touch on the local match grant program that is going to be administered by the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. This was an extension of the program that was done by the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget last summer. It was extremely successful. We saw 445 applications, over $1 billion of requests. They modified it just slightly as we're going to this new program, and there are a lot of details to still be discovered. But as we know from the bill that it was incorporated in, it's $25 million, and it's available to all municipalities and counties in the 3rd to 5th classes. So counties in the 1st and 2nd class, those counties are not eligible to apply, but the municipalities inside those counties are eligible. It must be used for housing or water projects as outlined by Treasury guidance in the state local fiscal recovery funds. And it does give some qualifiers for being eligible. You would be listed as ineligible if the applicant has significant unprogrammed ARPA dollars, or if you've used revenue replacement after February 1st, 2022. So as you're going to do your reporting and you're thinking about the projects that are coming and what you are planning as a city to spend your state and local fiscal recovery funds on, you'll want to be cognizant of this deadline, of which you will now be ineligible if you use revenue replacement after February 1st. And that is what is in statute there. We're hoping to work with them in the future to get more details on this program to see if they'll be taking new applications or taking from the old program, and other information to be given to the public. But we will keep you updated on that as we move forward. Right before I give it over to Laura Hanson here, I just want to remind everyone that we're going to do questions in the chat box throughout the presentation. We have a lot of presenters today, which we're super excited about, but we want to make sure that everyone gets the time that they need to present the information that they have. So we're going to put questions in the chat box, and if we don't get to them, either at the end of this spring training, or if we don't get to them while we're presenting, we are planning on answering them after and sending out a question and answer with those questions. So they won't get lost, they will get answered. But please feel free to put as many questions as you have in the chat box, and we'll work to get to them. And with that, I will get over to Laura.
Thank you so much, Liam. Let me just get my screen going here. Okay, so I'm sure you have all heard a lot about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, and you're all wondering, well, what does this mean for our communities? And so I'm here to share a little bit of an update from the governor's office about how we're approaching this as a state. Every governor received a request from the White House asking them to designate an infrastructure implementation coordinator to help facilitate and make sure that each state is really maximizing the opportunity that's presented in this generational infrastructure investment, and making sure that we're geared up to really take advantage of that. And so the governor's office of planning and budget has been tasked with this job. I am the official infrastructure coordinator, but will be receiving a lot of support and assistance from Taylor Kaufman here in our office, who is our federal funds manager, as well as oversight from our executive director, Sophia DiCaro, and managing director of budget and operations, Duncan Evans. So we'll make sure that if any grants are received by the state, it will be included into the governor's budget, the state's budget for the year. Let me see. So just high-level overviews about the IIJA. This was approved by Congress and signed in November of 2021. It is different than ARPA or the CARES funding in a few ways. With ARPA and CARES, the state received this big chunk of money that was just kind of this, we had lots of discretion on how we wanted to spend that. The IIJA is different in that there are some very specific, it's funding that's coming through very specific programs. Most of those are existing programs. A lot of it is formula funding, but there are a handful of new competitive grant programs that are included in this as well. It covers a wide variety of topics, ranging from transportation to broadband to resiliency and cybersecurity. A whole range of things here. And because it covers so many different areas, the role that we're playing at GOPB to coordinate all of this is really one of centralizing the communication. Overall, this bill is significant. It's $1.2 trillion in total funding, which is a lot. However, most of that is reauthorization of existing federal spending. And so this is money that the federal government has been spending anyways. And this bill just said, yes, you can keep spending that money. There is $550 billion of new funding that is included within the bill. Again, most of that is probably formula funding that is coming through to the states through standard formulas, but there are some competitive programs as well. 12 federal agencies, 380 unique funding programs are available. Of those 380, we've identified 319 that we think could be available to Utah stakeholders. Some of those states are eligible. Many of those local governments are eligible to apply, as well as tribal nations. We're still waiting on a lot of information about this, about how much money is coming to Utah. The federal government is rolling pieces or information out in pieces. So right now we know of $3.9 billion that is coming to Utah through formula funding, or coming to Utah in total. 3.1 of that is reauthorized formula funding. So it's not new. A lot of this is money that we would have been receiving anyways. But there are a handful of new opportunities for us to dive into. So in terms of our organizational structure at the state, we've created a coordination team, essentially, led by Governor Cox and managed by GOPB's office. But within that, we have a series of coordination team members and implementation team members that are structured around the way state government is established. So we'll have an energy coordination lead, a water coordination lead, a transportation coordination lead, a broadband lead. And each of those groups will be responsible for really trying to organize working groups, bring partners together, build partnerships to go after specific grant opportunities. You can learn more about this as well as getting contact info on each of those contact leads on our website, which is gopb.utah.gov/infrastructure. And I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. One thing that I wanted to point out is that we have this tracking dashboard that we've created. If you click on this, it will open up a fairly dynamic spreadsheet, essentially with lists of each of the grant programs organized around categories and a list of which state agency is overseeing all of that. We are trying to think of ways to make this dashboard more useful to local governments so that you can find the information that you're looking for. At the same time, we're trying to strike the right balance of not replicating a resource that the White House has already produced, which is a website called build.gov, and you can link to that through our website as well. I'll put both of those in the chat. If you are wondering, okay, what do I do now? I'm interested, we have an energy project, we have a transportation project or a broadband project that we'd like to undertake as a community. We're hoping that you will work through the league, through UAC, through your AOG, to get the information. And if there's a specific project that you're really interested in, feel free to reach out directly to the coordination leads for any of those specific areas. All their contact information is available there. And so with that, I will just leave you with our website, and I'll look forward to answering your questions when we finish. Thank you. And I think Ben Hewitt from UDOT is up next. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I'm Ben Hewitt, the UDOT Program Development Director, and I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if everybody's seeing that correctly? Perfect, thank you. So building on what Laura presented, I'm going to just do a little bit more information on the transportation funding category that she mentioned with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So there's two main areas that I'll cover in this information. The first one is formula programs. So like Laura mentioned, most of this is existing or reauthorization of existing programs. So I've listed those on this slide. This is the things that we've been dealing with and working with in the past, other than the ones that are shown here as new. So there are some new categories within the federal aid highway programs. There's a carbon reduction program, which is targeting reduction of transportation emissions. And then there's a protect formula program, which is addressing risk and resiliency and in transportation. And so both of those are new, and we have the apportionment information for funding for those, but we do not have the guidance yet. So that's one of those things that Laura mentioned, that they're rolling out guidance kind of staggered. And so there's more to come on how those work and some of the sub-allocation, how that works with those. Then I've listed a couple other new ones. These are under different categories, but there's a new bridge formula program, which I'm going to go in a little bit more detail because it's got some local government applicability. And then the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. So there's a formula program piece of this, which is initially targeted at building out charging infrastructure on alternative fuel corridors. Generally, that's like freeways and some of the main connections through the state. So that's a new program also. So I'm going to jump in just a little bit of information on the bridge formula program because this is new and fairly exciting. So Utah will receive about $45 million a year in this new program. And that's actually the minimum amount that a state can receive. And that's due to the fact that generally Utah has good condition bridges. The bridge condition is good in Utah. With this program, there's a minimum of 15% of that is set aside for off-system bridges. So there's federal aid highways, those are called on-system, and then there's all the other roads which are called off-system. And those historically, those off-system bridges have been hard to figure out ways to fund with different funding eligibility requirements and match requirements and everything. So this is a great program to be able to try to get to some of those off-system bridges that have been tricky in the past. One of the elements of that is that there's no match required for off-system bridges with this funding category and funding program. And then the guidance that came along with this new program is that there was encouragement to first focus on bridges classified in poor condition. And so I've included some information there that they're from our UDOT structures division about, we have 41 poor condition and 137 load restricted bridges that are locally owned in the National Bridge Inventory. And so with this program, what the structures team intends to do is primarily target those poor condition or load restricted locally owned off-system bridges. And to do that, they're going to be coordinating with the local owners of those programs. So they're building out their program plan, and there's going to be some reach out on, looking at those poor condition bridges and figuring out how best to package some bundles and stuff like that to get those projects accomplished. And then in future years, the current plan is to do some shifting to some of the poor condition or load restricted on system bridges. They're still the locally owned, still targeting the locally owned bridges, but those on system bridges, the reason for a little bit more time in there is there's still match requirements on those. So it may take some additional coordination to get to those. And then I've just included a map that shows some location, but like I said, Structures is working, building their program plan, and they're going to be doing some reach out and coordination in the next while with local owners. So then the second category that I wanted to talk about briefly is the competitive grant portion, and specifically to transportation. And I've just listed some high level areas of where those grants are targeted. This is just very broad, but highway, bridge, public transportation, passenger freight rail, airports, multimodal projects, EV charging, technology, research and planning. So there's a lot of categories that these grant programs potentially hit. And then I'll just point to that this is also from that build.gov website that Laura mentioned, that there's a guidebook that I've linked there that has some initial, summary pages for each one of the different grants that are in there. And so if anyone wants to get a high level information on some of the grants that are going to be part of this, that's a good place to start. Going a little bit deeper, some of the current grant opportunities that are available right now, I've listed here. So there's a RAISE grant, there's a National Scenic Byways program, and then there's a package of 3 different grant programs, which is multimodal project discretionary grant. So the acronyms are mega, infra, and rural. And so there's different grants that are out on the street right now. And when they come out, they list what's called a notice of funding opportunity or NOFO. And I've linked to the releases in the titles of those grants for anyone that wants more information on those different grant programs. I guess my general request and maybe offer for communication and coordination is I've listed Chris Potter's contact information there. He's the UDOT local government engineer. And like Laura mentioned, we'd like to try to coordinate through the AOGs and those types of entities to try to gather what different entities are going after or interested in pursuing, so that we can communicate and coordinate that effort and also report up and maybe offer some resources or anything as that happens. So, I mean, if you've got questions on some of the specifics of any kind of grant Chris Potter may be a good person to reach out to, because he does, study up on those as they come out, the transportation ones at least. And so I'll just offer that as a point of contact. And then my last slide here is just some resources. This is all in addition to the website that Laura mentioned for GOPB, but I've linked a couple or some other ones that maybe offer some help and guidance as people are looking at grants or just information on the funding in general. I mean, there's some on here for a toolkit for competitive funding programs from USDOT and stuff like that. So I will, I've linked all those in this presentation for people to look at if they need. And that was what I had. I will drop the link to this presentation in the chat once I sign off here. So with that, I believe I am done, and I will pass it to, I think Patti is next.
Thanks, Ben. I am Patti Garver, the Manager of Environmental and Grant Services at UTA. And I am going to share the transit benefits. So I'm going to tell you about the transit aspects of the bipartisan infrastructure law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as Laura and Ben have described. So from a public transportation perspective, the bill will provide $45 billion additional dollars available for public transportation over the next 5 years as compared to the previous 5 years. And that includes both formula and discretionary funds, as has been described. So we get formula funds based on our population and demographics. So compared to last year, the national formula funds will increase by $4 billion, and the discretionary funds will also increase by $4 billion. So that's fiscal year 21 as compared to fiscal year 22. And then in Utah, the formula funds for the state will increase by approximately $35 million. That's fiscal year 21 compared to 22. And for the 5 year, the full bill, that will be funding of $665 million, or an increase of $203 million. And so that's the formula funding for the state. So to show the discretionary funding that's available for transit, that includes $4.6 billion for what's known as capital investment grants. So that's for fiscal year 22, and capital investment grants, those include like the names of the grants are like small starts, new starts, core capacity. For example, we have a small starts grant right now that we're using to construct the OGX project. That's a BRT project in Ogden. The next discretionary grant shown is the low-no competitive grant. That is for low and no emission vehicles. And that is a total of $1.1 billion.
Division of Water Quality, the 5 years of the IIHA will receive $2.82 million. Most of that will go through Clean Water Act State Revolving Fund and the normal process. 49% of that funding has to be for grant or principal forgiveness. So they have to get exactly 49% for grant or principal forgiveness. So that will go to wastewater infrastructure projects primarily. Over the next 2 years, the Division of Water Quality will have a little less than $30 million in new federal funds through the Clean Water Act State Revolving Fund, as well as there's 2 new programs that were created in the bill. One is a sewer overflow and stormwater reuse municipal grants, and the other one is Federal Water Protection Control Act to address emerging contaminants, PFAS, PFOA on the wastewater side. On then my shop, the Division of Drinking Water, we are looking at over the 5 years of the IIJA, $305 million in new federal. For the next 2 years, we've received approval, authorization for the legislature and matching funds for almost $115 million in new federal funding. The bill created 2 new, most of that will go through our normal drinking water SRF program. And so if you have a drinking water project that you need to seek funding for, including planning grants, come through my SRF program. I'll share my screen and show you both the Clean Water Act and the Drinking Water SRF links online. But the 2 new programs that were created were the lead service line replacement funding, which is almost $30 million a year, the 5 years of the IIJA. And that is both for the first to inventory, identify lead service lines, and then replace them. And then there's a safe drink. The last program is the Safe Drinking Water Act, emerging contaminants. So that's dealing with PFAS, PFOA. It can be used for harmful algae blooms and cyanotoxin, manganese, iron, and other emerging contaminants in drinking water sources. So that can sample and find those. Emerging contaminants, and it can also be used to add treatment to address those emerging contaminants going forward. So with that, I'll just, since it sounds like I'm going in and out, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. So Tim Davis at the Division of Water Quality, or Erica Gaddis at the Division of Drinking Water, or Erica Gaddis at the Division of Water Quality, and we can answer, we can provide you more answers, provide you details, point you to our specific staff. With that, Miranda, since I'm going in and out, I'm just going to go to you next.
No worries. Sorry. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I think some folks just were also asking if you have your points from your presentation written up, that we can share those out as well, which I think would probably be helpful. So anyways, thanks, Tim. Well, hi, everyone. Miranda Jones-Cox. I'm the Government Affairs Manager at Wasatch Front Regional Council. We're the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the Association of Government for the Wasatch Front area that encompasses Salt Lake, Davis, Weber, and several other counties. And so I want to kind of just wrap things up here a little bit, specifically to the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, and kind of build on what Laura and some of the others here have shared, and maybe make it applicable to you all, and how you all can really take advantage of these opportunities in the infrastructure bill. It's a little overwhelming, frankly, like being in this space, like there's so much funding out there, a lot of opportunities out there, and it's not always clear how local governments can really take advantage of these opportunities. And so I'm gonna just kind of get some slides going here. Give me one moment. Liam, can you see that okay? Okay, perfect. So just to kind of start out, Laura gave a really great overview of what the infrastructure bill does, and that there's funding coming to Utah, both in transportation and water and energy. And there's a lot of funding that's coming directly to the state that can be spent, but then there's also these discretionary grant programs, which state governments and local governments and various entities will have the opportunity to apply for over the next 5 years. So to kind of highlight what this, what the timeline looks like over those 5 years, just wanted to get into that first. And the first is that it is 5 years. The bill funds these grant programs and funds, transportation, other programs of the state over a 5-year period. And so over the next 5 years, and we're already seeing notices of funding opportunity being released from federal agencies, we will see these NOFOs, or notice of funding opportunities, kind of trickled out. Some of the programs will have annual awards. So RAISE, for example, is a transportation funding opportunity that will have multiple years of funding. Other grant programs will only be available once and will be available until all the funding allocated for it has been expended. And then some programs will just be released on a single year basis. And so we're still trying to wrap our head around what opportunities really are out there. And part of this presentation is to help you all in your communities try and wrap your heads around that as well, and what you can take advantage of. I think, Laura, maybe we alluded to this, but there are hundreds of grant programs available. The infrastructure bill and the funding opportunities or federal grants aren't new, right? Like, we've been applying for federal grants for years, but the amount of federal grant opportunities has increased significantly with this infrastructure bill. So for example, there are maybe roughly 10 existing grant programs in transportation until now, and there's now more than like 30 plus or 40 specific transportation grant programs that many local cities, counties, etc., can apply for. And so again, many have been existing, most are new, and we're still wrapping our heads around what the requirements are for these programs, and what projects are really make sense to pursue. So that's kind of what we'll talk about next. How can my community prepare to take advantage of these opportunities? And I want to break it down into a few things. First is just getting prepared, right? You and your community, your staff, the good folks at your cities have to kind of start getting a game plan in place. And so I've kind of nailed it down into some four things that you should or could do to start preparing to take advantage of these priorities or these opportunities. And the first is to begin developing a list of priority projects. For many of our cities, this isn't new, and many of you know what your priority projects are. They've been your priorities for years now, but for many of us, it's still identifying, okay, if these opportunities are out there and available, and we can take advantage of them, what is most important to us now and for years to come? What would make a difference in our community? And again, the infrastructure bill is transportation, water, broadband, energy. There's so many things, and here at WFRC, we of course kind of focus specifically on transportation, and are always happy to help in that process or in identifying what your key projects should be, or if those projects maybe are competitive. That's where you kind of need to start, is your priority projects. Second is just exploring what opportunities are out there and available. Laura and Ben, they kind of alluded to a few resources that are extremely helpful. I have those at the end of the presentation as well. But of note is build.gov, right? So build.gov has every grant opportunity available out there, information about and summaries about them, potential deadlines if there are some. We're still waiting to get a full picture on when all those grant programs will be available. and who is ultimately eligible. And so being able to go through and explore those funding opportunities and kind of match them with what your priority projects are is kind of the next step. Third is coordinating with the relevant entity. I have here listed MPOs, the state, etc. We really appreciate GOPB and Laura specifically as the infrastructure coordinator for the state and putting together this hierarchy and this system for all of our entities, our government entities, to be able to seek additional guidance and help and coordinate with the state within our various categories of transportation, water, etc. And be able to work together to pursue these projects, in conjunction. Us at WFRC are absolutely willing and able to help you in your processes as well, and in identifying key projects and identifying opportunities. And us, in addition to, we're hoping our other AOG partners will also do the same, but we'll be continuing to push out information to our members when these notices of funding opportunities become available, and we want you guys to be able to see them and see that they're out and you can apply. And then the fourth thing is for preparation is evaluate your internal capacity. I think it's critical that you take a good look at what capacity you have internally with your staff, resources, and time to pursue these federal funding opportunities. If we could all apply for all of the opportunities and 10 or 15 different grant programs, that would be great, but that is not an effective use of everyone's time, nor is it a competitive way to put your best foot forward. And so I just think being able to identify what your constraints are, and what you can realistically do, along with our partnership and help from these other and relevant entities, will really help you again put your best foot forward, or best grant application forward. As far as making, again, kind of talking about how can we prepare ourselves, now let's talk about what makes a good project for a grant proposal. So I put together a few principles of competitiveness. This is, according to Miranda, that like Ben mentioned as well, grants.gov has a lot of really great information where they outline helpful resources or helpful things to keep in mind as you are putting together a grant application. But kind of highlighting some of those and some of my own, I think these are important. So one is just having a robust understanding of the grant opportunity itself and the process. I think a lot of people or organizations tend to get tripped up in the grant process because they're not adhering to what the grant is looking for specifically, or deadlines, or really fine-tuning the application with what is being asked of. And so just, being able to have a deep dive into that specific opportunity and understand its requirements, I think is very important. Second is having broad community support. This is listed as an important principle of competitiveness. Being able to have support from state partners, planning agencies, other regional partners shows to the feds that this is not just a project that is important to a single entity. Even though that is important, it shows that you have collective support behind you and this project, and it does help projects fare better. A strong local match. You'll note, it is important to note that most, if not all, most of these discretionary grant programs coming out through the infrastructure bill will have a required local match. Sometimes that's 20% match. Sometimes it's not. So again, that's something else to consider is what funds do you and your community have to match these federal dollars, and being able to demonstrate that not only do you have dollars going towards the project, but other investments in the project as well. And the greater, the better, right? It definitely is. It definitely, again, helps the project fare better. Last 2 points are selectivity and specificity. Again, kind of tying with a prior point, is this opportunity worth your time and your city's time, your staff's time? And does the project you've selected fit the parameters well? If it doesn't, then you may waste your time by applying to this grant program and not get the return on investment that you're looking for. And again, we're competing against not just other cities here in our state, we're competing against cities and counties and states throughout the country. And so keeping realistic expectations in mind is important with these programs. And then last thing is just good specificity in your application. Having good, clean data, a detailed argument, a comprehensive yet concise argument as well. So again, some important things to keep in mind if you do decide to pursue some of these programs. Another thing that I think is worth noting is these grant programs and the infrastructure bill itself has administration priorities, specifically Biden administration priorities, by which these programs are seen through a lens, right? And all the funding coming through the infrastructure bill is seen through this lens. And some of those priorities, and this is not a comprehensive list, but I would maybe say these are the top ones, is equity, climate change and resilience, regional impact, and safety. Again, you can find more information online about what these really look like and how it may or may not apply to your project. I don't know that you need to have, all of these priorities as a part of your project, but I would say that the more you have, and at least having an equity component or a resilience component or safety component, being able to demonstrate that well, it will make your project more successful. So the kind of the last point I want to make here is how should we be coordinating this moving forward? How should your city be coordinating? How is the state coordinating? Again, Laura talked about that a little bit, but to touch on this, again, consult with your relevant local and regional partners for local applications. The Association of Governments like WFRC, the Mountain Land Association of Governments, and the other AOGs throughout the state. Consult with the league. I mean, Liam is awesome and has been kind of head down in this ARPA space for a long time. And while I know he's not quite as focused on infrastructure bill stuff, being able to use the league as support, I think, is great as well. And then lastly, again, like Laura and Ben mentioned, the state infrastructure investment, the IIJA implementation team. So all of those agency contacts that will be able to help you, again, kind of come through the process, identify projects, etc. But I also want to note that aside from cities and counties and our local partners trying to coordinate, our state partners are also working together to coordinate on regional and state project applications. So UDOT, UTA, WFRC, and again, a lot of these other partners outside of the transportation space are in the process of identifying what big state or regional projects are worth pursuing. So for example, a few years ago, we applied for a RAISE grant for a RAISE used to be called like Tiger Build, but for a first last mile effort for kind of a smattering of local projects throughout the entire region. And we're looking again to pursue that next year or year after, because we see that the RAISE grant again is another opportunity to get some specific funding for this first last mile effort. So Ben kind of already put these up. I wanted to just raise them as well. These are transportation notice of funding opportunities that are currently available. RAISE, mega infra and rural. There's a few others. But one other point that I wanted to highlight that is not IIJA related, but is related to federal funding, is that Congress is now again accepting earmark requests to be for the fiscal year 23 appropriations bill. So these are not just transportation projects. These can be, I'm not sure the entire parameter and what projects are generally successful here, but it's a pretty quick turnaround. We're just now hearing about these opportunities. But it's about, you know, I think Congressman Stewart's deadline is April 8th, while Congressman Moore's is April 15th. And we're still waiting to hear back from Congressman Owens on when they'll be accepting, when their deadline is for accepting project requests. Earmarks are a little bit smaller. They're anywhere from like $500,000 to $5 million for an earmark. And congressional offices, I think, only can request up to 15 earmark requests. But it, you know, in the FY22 appropriations bill, there were Utah projects that were submitted by our congressional delegation. So again, just want to raise that as an opportunity for you all. Feel free to reach out if you have questions about that. And then lastly, kind of one thing I just wanted to share is that for transportation projects in transportation projects by which communities may seek out these federal infrastructure funding grants. We recommend and our partners recommend, and I think it's even like maybe a federal, I don't know if it's a requirement or a recommendation, but that the project should be included in the Unified Plan, the Regional Transportation Plan, or the Transportation Improvement Plans. And so again, something to keep in mind as you're selecting transportation projects. So again, GOPB's website is on here, super helpful. And then lastly, that build.gov, I would highly recommend spending some time looking through potential opportunities there. And yeah, happy to, I think, turn things back over to Liam. And if folks have any questions, I'm sure we all will happily answer them. So.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Miranda. Thank you, everybody, for presenting and spending some time with us this afternoon, and for everybody joining us on this spring training webinar. It was really great. I think we got a lot of really great information, and hopefully for our local governments, you guys are able to see and meet some of our great contacts and our great partners, and know who you might be able to reach out to if you have any questions. I do see a couple of questions in here, and I'm sorry if I missed any when our internet went out at great timing. So if I just don't see those, if you want to put those back in there, then that would work. So I see Amy's question talking about the standard allowance on the revenue replacement. It'll be easier to answer this probably in writing. So when we get these questions back, it'll be easier to make some references to the federal rule there. But as I've gone through the rule, they've made it clear that that standard allowance is available to all recipients of SLFRF funds, and that there aren't any qualifiers on it. I had similar questions when the rule first came out, and I read through it and the overview. And it's been the National League of Cities opinion as well that there are no qualifiers on it. The National Association of Counties opinion that there aren't any qualifiers on being able to use a standard allowance, and Treasury has made reference to it in a few different webinars that I've been on as well. But it'll be easier to answer that specifically for the federal rule, and getting a source to that. That'll be easier to answer probably in writing. So I'll get that prepared and I'll send that out to everybody once we have that. John Hiskey's question on public participation requirements. This is something I still need to dig a little deeper on, but as I was in DC for the National League of Cities conference, we talked a little bit about public participation requirements, and it sounded like a few different cities went the route of whatever they were spending their money on, or if they were going to go with revenue replacement of spending their ARPA dollars, that they decided to have a resolution be passed by their city council and invited public comment during that time. There's more information definitely to look into on that aspect, but I thought that that was a great idea and a great way for clarity to their citizens of what their plans are and noticing it appropriately and having a discussion on that. So that's one way I've seen a few different cities go about that requirement. Tyson's question on what is significant unprogrammed funds. That is a good question, and there wasn't any definition to that specifically for that local match program that's going to be administered by the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. We are planning on working with them still to see exactly what they're looking for. As far as that goes, I think really the main concern was just not having applicants apply for these dollars and giving grant dollars that have not spent any money. If you have plans for it, or if you're obligating money, that will go a ways. But as far as what exactly they're looking for, what exact requirements are going to have, we just don't know at this point what that is. And I'm going to go up here. Judy's question on getting into the site. There have been quite a few people that have had some problems on getting into the site. There is a resource from Treasury that talks about logging in, and if you're having problems, there's also that slfrp@treasury.gov. I'll put that in the chat. That email address that you can send your questions to, they are not always the fastest at responding, as I've learned, but that's a resource that they have there. But there's also a resource that they have for a webinar and for slides that talk about getting into your program or getting into your portal to report on your projects and expenditures. So I'll include that too as we go through these questions. And they're neither fast nor helpful is a comment that was made in there that I won't agree with or disagree with because we're recording this, right? Yeah, so I see that. Are there any other questions that I may have missed while I was out, or any questions for our panelists on the infrastructure bill? Just wait a quick second. Is there anything else from any other panelists that you wanted to add? As we're waiting to see if any other questions come in. Okay. All right, well, I think that's it. I think that's the questions that we'll get for right now. So I want to say thank you again to Laura Hanson at GOPB, to Ben at UDOT, Patti at UTA, Tim at DEQ, and Miranda at WFRC. Thank you guys so much for joining us and helping with this spring training. I think it went really well. I'm appreciative of all the work that you guys do and how you help our member cities and towns. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll get this information out to you guys quickly.